I know I haven't made a YouTube video in literally a year, but I do like to do one almost every year to talk about my favourite books, as I think this is quite a nice record to have of that. Compared to last year, 2022 was a more successful reading year for me. I read about the same amount of books as last year, but this was more successful in terms of finding new favourites. I have 10 favourite books to share. 3 of them are part of the same trilogy, so I'm kind of counting that as 3 individual books. These are going to be ranked, so I'm starting off with my 10th favourite book and then moving my way up to my number 1 favourite book of the year. A little disclaimer as well, I've recently had a cold, so if I sound a bit congested, that's why. So starting in the number 10 spot, we have The Transgender Issue by Shon Faye. This is a non-fiction UK-centric book about what it means to be trans in a transphobic society. Don't go into this book expecting the usual debates of whether trans people should be allowed to use the public restroom of their choosing, or whether non-binary people and gender-neutral pronouns are valid. Those things are not what this book is. It's instead a radical manifesto for change for all trans people in the UK. In the UK, currently there is a real moral panic over trans people that's equivalent to what queer people experienced with the AIDS crisis in the 80s. The worst thing too is that it's coming from all sides of the political spectrum. So we have like more left-wing feminists aligning themselves with conservative politicians. Shon Faye does dive into the topic of anti-trans feminism and trans people's relationship with the wider LGBTQ plus community, but she also goes into the fundamental issues in our society that makes trans people's lives worse. For example, the fact that trans people are more likely to live in poverty and be unemployed, which means that they will often turn to sex work as that is their only option, which is also stigmatised and criminalised. I do find it really cliche to say that a book is an essential read or an important read, but this is a powerful, blistering book that will be very educational for a lot of people. It's not super long as well, but it is dense. As you can tell, I've tabbed this one so much, and I'm probably going to go back in and highlight some stuff at some point, which I think shows how much information that you can learn and gain from this book. Next we have Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. This is about a girl called Mila who has recently graduated from high school and kind of like aged out of the foster care system. She's offered a job and a place to stay at a farm on an isolated part of the Northern California coast. And I wouldn't say this book is like spooky, but it's more like haunting, as the farm is kind of like haunted by the past traumas of its young residents, and this is kind of like a ghost story really. I read Watch Over Me back in February. That took me ages to read, which is not the book's fault, it's my fault. Objectively, this is Nina LaCour's best book. I have read Everything Leads to You and We Are Okay by her before, but I think in terms of story quality and writing, this is her best book, and I really want to reread it soon, as it has just really beautiful, calm, quiet writing, and she writes about grief so well, I think. And I can't wait to read as well her adult debut that's called Yerba Buena that came out this year. I don't own it yet, but I really want to soon. I'll share with you one of my favourite quotes from the book to give you an idea of what it's like. I'm learning that it's good to think about what scares you, to bring it into the light, even to hold it in your hands if you can, and feel how it can't hurt you anymore. To think of it and say, I am not afraid. My next favourite book of the year is also one I read kind of early on in 2022, and that is The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley, which is a mystery thriller about a girl who goes to visit her brother in Paris and discovers that he is missing. So she's working to figure out where her brother is, what's happened to him, as she becomes familiar with the other residents in the apartment complex. Similar to the guest list, it's kind of like an ensemble cast of characters, and they're all very like archetypal, like stereotypes. So there's like the socialite, the nice guy, the alcoholic, the girl on the verge, the concierge, and we switch between all their different perspectives. This might be a bit of a controversial choice to put it in my favourite books because not many people liked this. However, I just had a lot of fun reading this. I had a note on my phone that started out as a character list, just to remind me of like who all the characters were and like what the relations are to each other. Then it just became me theorising and reacting to all of the twists. Like there's one halfway through the book that just made me go, as if, in a positive way, obviously. Next we have another kind of like mystery thriller, and that is To Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. Technically this is the first like full-on thriller I've ever read, and there is good reason why everybody recommends this as a good beginner thriller. The book starts out of the protagonist writing from prison to her lawyer because she's been arrested for allegedly murdering the kids that were in her care as a nanny. So we go back to her answering the job post to be a living nanny for a family with 3 kids. that live in the Scottish Highlands, and the job post itself has a very generous salary, so it's one of those things that seems like it's too good to be true. And the house itself has been completely renovated into like a smart house, so it has lots of mod cons, and it's completely controlled by an app on your phone. In general too, there are lots of creepy things going on. The kids aren't the best behaved. It's in an isolated environment, and it all just builds up to a point where it's like unbearable. It was a very tense read. The audiobook was really strong as well. The twists I didn't see coming either. I think over time, as I read more thrillers, twists will become less predictable. But for me, this is just a really enjoyable book that made me feel a lot. I definitely want to read Ruth Ware's other books as well now. Next we have Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, which is a big surprise for me that this is on this list actually. The one thing I knew about this book before going into it is that it was weird. So I went into it expecting not to understand anything, and I was pleasantly surprised that I actually had a decent grasp on the story. I've always been scared to try like magical realism, fabulism, weird books. Again, due to the fear of like not understanding what's going on and just feeling a bit stupid. I'll read you the synopsis on the back, which doesn't fully explain what's going on, but you get the gist of the vibes, I guess. Piranesi lives in the house. Perhaps he always has. The messages begin to appear, scratched out in chalk on the pavements. There is someone new in the house. But who are they, and what do they want? Lost texts must be found, secrets must be uncovered. The world that Piranesi thought he knew is becoming strange and dangerous. The beauty of the house is immeasurable, its kindness infinite. For me, actually going into this book, accepting that I wouldn't understand everything that's going on actually really helped. And reading this has now given me the confidence to try out more like kind of magical realism, fabulism, weird books by like Christina Leno or A.S. King. I initially gave this book 4.5 stars, but it's one that really stuck with me for a while after I read it, so it deserved to be on this list of favourites. In the 5th spot we have I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. Obviously this is one of the biggest books of the year. I'd heard of Jennette before, but I actually didn't watch iCarly as a kid because we didn't have Nickelodeon. I knew little bits about her life and upbringing, but I mainly picked up this book for like the provocative title really, as I'm sure like a lot of other people did. It's a memoir about her experiences growing up as a child actor with an abusive mother and an eating disorder that was started by her mother as well. I'm so glad I listened to the audiobook that was narrated by Jennette, as I think I just got more of a full experience compared to just reading it. I would really recommend this book, but I implore you to fully look up the content warnings first, as there's a content warning for pretty much everything. I've seen a couple of reviews that say this is quite funny in places and has a sense of humour, and whilst there are some bits that were like a little bit humorous, I don't see this as like a funny book at all. This is a very hard-hitting, like emotional memoir, and after I finished reading it I was left speechless. Next we have a book that I'm sure is going to be on a lot of people's favourites list, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Full disclosure, I only finished reading this yesterday, and this is my first ever R.F. Kuang. As the Poppy War, whilst I've heard amazing things about it, it's just not my type of fantasy. Babel is a dark academia fantasy about Oxford University and the Royal Institute of Translation, Babel, in around the 1830s and beyond, like the Victorian period. We are following Robin Swift, who is orphaned by cholera in Canton, and he's brought to London by Professor Lovell, who is a professor at Oxford, and Robin basically gets trained up in Latin, ancient Greek and Chinese, all with the purpose of eventually studying at Oxford at the Royal Institute of Translation. The fantasy element basically what we call silver magic or silver working, where there are basically these silver bars where on each side of the bar there are words inscribed. So on one side there's the English, on the other side there's the Chinese as an example, and the words that will often have multiple meanings, and when activated these silver bars have a great power and can do magical things, and they can basically run everything in the city of Oxford. But really this is a book about the British Empire, colonialism and imperialism. I am not qualified to speak on those topics at all. This book was a lot of learning for me, as my school history lessons did not educate me on those topics. This is pitched as a thematic response to The Secret History, which I haven't read, it's on my TBR, but I'd say it is accurately a critique on academia, the system in general, and like the hidden side of it of how students will work themselves to the bone and stress themselves out. And I really appreciated those critiques and what the book has to say overall. The bluntness, the honesty and the way that it holds up a mirror to everything is something that is definitely going to mean a lot to a lot of people. The full title of this book actually is Fable or the Necessity of Violence, an arcane history of the Oxford Translators' Revolution. And in the latter half of the book, the theme of the necessity of violence in revolution does really come into play. I can't say too much about that without like spoiling anything, but yeah, I obviously love the atmosphere. We do get Robin's perspective, but I did like the ensemble of characters, the babblers. For a very big book and the subject matter, it's not as intimidating as I thought it would be. It's actually pretty accessible and it kept me interested throughout, even when there wasn't a lot of action happening either. Now we are into my top 3 books of the year, and these are all part of the same series, so I'm kind of counting it as 3 individual books but also as like one thing, and that is the Good Girls Guide to Murder series by Holly Jackson. This is a mixed media murder mystery series following a girl called Pippa. She basically solves mysteries in her like small little English town, but now I'll just hold up the first book whilst I talk about it. So I had seen this book around and I was hesitant to try it as YA mystery thrillers usually get mixed reviews from people that I trust. However, this got glowing reviews from my favourite booktubers, so I'm glad I gave the book a chance. In the first book, Pippa is solving a case from years ago where a teenage girl got murdered and she believes that the accused murderer was framed essentially and didn't actually commit the crime. In the second, Good Girl Bad Blood, she is starting her true crime podcast and someone close to her goes missing, so she has to find out what happened there. And in the third book, As Good as Dead, she becomes the mystery. Pippa has a stalker and she's trying to find out who it is. I would actually say that this one is my favourite book in the series, and the second is my least. This is just my least because I wasn't a big fan of the ending. The reason I love this series is I just think it's such a fun read, really well plotted. There is stuff from the first book that comes back into play in the last one, so clearly Holly Jackson has planned this really well. I'd say the characters are like mostly likeable as well. There are obviously your villains, your antagonists, but it's very easy to love most of the side characters in this series. I love Pippa as well. She is very relatable for all the ambitious overachievers, and the series just has so many twists and turns. It really does keep you reading and keep you hooked. For books that aren't particularly short, you could honestly read them in like a couple of days. As I said, the third book, As Good as Dead, is my favourite, which is actually a bit of a controversial pick as a lot of fans of the series don't like this book. It is a really big shift in character for Pippa and a big shift in tone compared to the first two. However, I read this straight after finishing the second book, and at the end of this book, in the last 50 pages or so, we started to see the beginnings of Pippa's PTSD and paranoia, and that carries on into As Good as Dead. And all of that I think is only natural. Pippa has been through and seen a lot of horrific things, so of course she's going to be traumatised. Maybe as well because I'm 26 years old and this is a YA series. The more serious and dark tone of the third book is probably more appealing to me. Reading this series is just such a wild and stressful time, but I absolutely loved it. Also, this is being adapted into a TV series by BBC Three, which I'm very excited for. And I have Holly Jackson's new release on my TBR called Five Survive, which I'm planning to read in January, and I am very excited for that as well. So there we have it. Those are my 10 favourite books that I read in 2022. Let me know in the comments what your favourite book that you read this year was. I hope you have a great day, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye!